Alright, gentlemen, today we're going to start looking at the French Revolution in Chapter 18. So this is a video lecture, so just like my audio lectures, you're going to be expected to take notes. I'm going to follow along right with the PowerPoint. And Section 1 is going to look at France on the eve of the Revolution. What sort of things brought about the Revolution? And if we take a look at it, French society was divided up into three estates, or what we call three social classes. The first estate was the clergy. The second estate, the nobility. And the third estate was everybody else. And if we look at it, the third estate comprised about 90 to 95% of the entire French population, so it was huge. But what I'd like you to do in your notes, I'd like you to take a look at that picture on the PowerPoint there and answer, what's going on in the cartoon? How are the three estates illustrated? How are they drawn up? And what do we think is going on here? And we're going to answer that question on Monday when we get back together. Yeah. During the Middle Ages, the clergy exerted great influence throughout Europe. The French clergy enjoyed enormous wealth and privilege. The church owned about 10% of all land, collecting tithes and paying no taxes directly to the states. Bishops and abbots were usually the most well off, whereas parish priests were sometimes just as poor as their congregation. But what we see is during the Enlightenment, the philosophes started targeting the church for reform. They criticized their idleness of some of the clergy and political interference. In response, the church was highly critical of the Enlightenment for undermining religion and moral order. In other words, they failed to make any real or significant changes. The second estate was the titled nobility of French society, holding many of the top jobs in government, the army, and the courts. At Versailles, the royal French residence, ambitious nobles competed for royal appointments. Outside of Versailles, many in the nobility owned a lot of land, but they received little financial income, and changes in prices greatly impacted their status and prestige in French society. Many nobles in the second estate hated absolutism and resented the royal bureaucracy that employed men from the third estate to positions that had once been reserved for them. Many nobles were afraid of having any changes in French society. They feared losing their traditional privileges, most importantly, freedom from paying any sort of taxes. The third estate was the largest and most diverse estate or social class in French society. Take a look at your book on page 1309 to look at this diversiveness. I would include this in your notes. It might be useful. If we look at the third estate, we can see that there were even divisions within this third estate. At the top of the third estate sat the bourgeoisie, or the middle class. These included prosperous bankers, merchants, and other professionals. There were also urban workers, including apprentice, journeymen, servants, and those who lived in some of the major cities. And then finally, rural peasants who worked the various farms outside of the big cities of Paris. Members of the third estate resented the privileges enjoyed by their social betters of the first and second estate. Some of the bourgeoisie could have good jobs, but many were still reserved exclusively for nobles. The smallest rise in price for bread, the main food source, brought about threats of great hunger and starvation. And finally, the first and the second estate almost paid no taxes, leaving the burden of funding France and its extravagance and its wars mainly on this diverse group of population. The third estate, though, is going to be inspired by the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment is going to teach them and have them start to question the inequalities of the old regime. And the question became, why should the first two estates have such great privilege at the expense of the rest of us? In addition to the Enlightenment beginning to question this social hierarchy, France is also going to experience some financial troubles, the most of which is going to come from the king, something called deficit spending. One of the main causes of social unrest and heightened tensions among the three estates was the major financial troubles of France. The French king and queen had what you could consider to be a spending problem. Their extravagant parties at Versailles and their great worldliness at Versailles. One of the major causes of social unrest and heightened tensions among the three estates was the major financial troubles of France. The French king had a problem of spending more money than the state was bringing in, something called deficit spending. We saw this in the video with the great banquets and some of the extravagance of Marie Antoinette. But in addition, the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution also added significant strain on the amount of money the French One of the causes of social unrest and heightened tensions among the three estates was the major financial troubles of France. As we saw in the video, the French king and queen had a problem of spending more money than the state was bringing in, something called deficit spending. Not only were they doing this in the extravagant balls and galas at Versailles, but we also see that the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution also added significant strain to the amount of money the French monarchy was spending. In order to make up for this deficit, the government was forced to borrow more money and more from other countries. By 1789, half of the government's income from taxes went to paying interest on their debts from other nations. In addition, poor harvests in the late 1780s sent food prices soaring and brought hunger and starvation to the poor peasants and city dwellers. In order to solve these financial issues, France would have to increase taxes and or reduce spending. Both the nobles and clergies fought to make sure, though, that they would not have to pay any more taxes. Any attempts at economic reform, though, is going to fail. A lack of strong leadership from the French monarchy further complicated France's economic woes. Louis XVI was well-meaning, but lacked a backbone to bring about any meaningful or long-lasting change to France's economic woes. He appointed Jacques Necker as his financial advisor. Necker had the audacity to talk about reducing extravagant spending from the monarchy and also brought up the ridiculous idea of taxing both the nobles and clergy. All things that neither the monarchy nor the first or second estate were willing to do. And I love this picture right here because I think it really illustrates Louis's only solution to dealing with the financial woes of France. Continuing to tax and to crush the third estate under the wealth and extravagance of everybody else. And what we're going to see on Monday is that he's going to call on the Estates General. Louis is going to realize that he is ill-prepared to deal with France's financial problems, and he's going to open the door by asking for his people's help. Guys, I hope you have a great weekend. Good luck to the soccer and the football team. Happy Fist Pump Friday on Thursday.